Thank you. My presentation is a general aspect of risk assessment and governance. I'm going to share some of the best practices that I and my organization have gathered over the years of managing IP-related risks. So, and I hope that my short presentation will be of value to the esteemed audience. And I would also like to get any feedback or suggestions that you might have. Before I get on to the actual subject matter, let me give a brief background to the kind of organization that I come from, which is Tata Consultancy Services. This is an IT services company, and we provide IT services, build products, give consultancy. So this is kind of different from research organizations. Obviously, we do have a research wing called the Research and Innovation Wing, and it's also different from how a law firm works. So from the context of a IT services and products company, you would need to look at it in that manner. So my presentation would be based on such experience. In terms of the organization that we have apart from the various business units, the research organization within the organization of TCS, as well as several horizontals. We have an IP, which is intellectual property cell, which actually promotes the culture of IP, promotes IP creation, IP usage, and IP safety within the organization and amongst the business units of all the deliverables that we create and all the products that we generate and commercialize. All right. With this, I would like to go on to my subject matter, because I just wanted to set the context first. Yeah, sorry. Okay. I would like to mention where the IP-related risk comes from. It comes straight from the beginning, or straight from the motivation that a company exists, which is its vision, its mission and values, which is part of the business strategy of the organization. Then we, from those vision, mission and values, we have the IP strategy, within which we have an IP charter and IP objectives, and we could also have other guidelines on IP that's based on the IP strategy. Within the IP strategy, we would have IP policy and operating principles, which is part of the IP governance. Our risk management, IP risk management, would need to cover all of these. Each of these IP policy statements, which are shall statements, we shall do this, we shall be IP safe, we shall do that, should all be covered under IP risk management. That's the broad guiding principles that I would like to share with you. This, according to me, is the overall IP risk management. It's an overall process. We start from the top left, which is the risk assessment. And when I say risk assessment, we as an IP cell of the entire organization, we interact with the various business units, and I'm taking the case of where we assess the IP-related risk of a business unit in particular, and that can be replicated across all business units that we interact with within the organization. So it's the identification and analysis of each risk situation that a particular business unit is exposed to. Then we have an impact evaluation of each risk situation. What are the impacts that each risk situation generates. One is the perceivable impact, which is the immediate impact that we perceive from a certain risk situation. However, that may not be exactly the impact that we may need to track. It could be, there could be a resultant impact from that perceivable impact that we probably need to track. I'll get on to the details a little bit more. After that, we have a determination exercise of mitigation actions. And I have broadly demarcated the mitigation actions into two parts. One is proactive mitigation actions, and the other is reactive mitigation actions. Within proactive, we have a preventive set of mitigation actions, and we have a contingency mitigation actions. Within reactive, we have a curative, or you could also consider them to be the same, a reactive mitigation, things that can be done after a risk actually happens. What follows an initial assessment of these three steps is the IP risk governance, and that is the most important part of the risk management that I consider, because that keeps the risk management alive, and that keeps the risk management on top of business and IP, the IP strategy and priorities. And this risk governance cycle is actually a review of all the constituents of the risk management. Then we learn from the review, we recalibrate our parameters, and then we incorporate the learnings from those reviews. At the end of this, probably at a yearly frequency, or depending on the maturity of the risk governance or risk management process, we should have an IP audit that checks all the processes that we have defined for ourselves, and just to make sure that we are on track. Now, getting into the details of risk assessment and exposure evaluation of a business unit, like I said, I'm taking the case of a particular business unit that I'm talking to, and of whom I'm trying to evaluate the exposure and assess the risk that that business unit is exposed to. We do need to identify the risk situations and threats that a particular group or business unit is exposed to. We need to identify the factors that contribute to the occurrence of each risk situation and threat. Some of these are number of people, the quantity and value of IP assets, the revenue, competitors of that business, the jurisdiction of operation, etc. And we could have many more. We need to score each of these contributing factors on a defined scale for each risk situation. We do have empirical formulas for carrying these out, but I don't want to specify that this is better or that is better. I'm just specifying some general principles that we follow. Okay. Then we need to summarize the overall exposure risk, exposure score for each risk situation on the same scale. So for each assessment, for each risk assessment, we come up with a score. This is a sample of a scoring exercise that we do. Let's say for business unit 1, we have a list of risk scenarios which is actually categorized under sample, under an example categorization of risks, which is, let's say the first one is loss of IP, second one being IP infringement, third one being IP contamination, and we could have many more. For each of these scenarios, we do a risk exposure evaluation as per the influencing factors that we have identified. Like I said before, some of these are number of associates, number of patents, number of copyrights, etc., the number of customers, jurisdiction, etc. So these values are obviously examples just to illustrate my point. Then we come up with, for each business, for each category of risks, we come up with a generalized score. So for scenario 1, maybe the score comes to be 4, and for another it comes to be 2 in a scale of 1 to 5, which is what I've used here. So 4 would mean a high risk, which you could translate to a probability. A 2 could be a lower risk, 1 could be negligible, in that order. I have actually steered clear of using a percentage probability, which I've seen some organizations use, because the percentage probability of a risk happening is very difficult to explain. Only when you get down to at least one level down and use parameters and influencing parameters for each of the risks, can we actually justify why an exposure, risk exposure, comes to a certain value. Then we do an impact analysis of each risk situation. We start off with a perceivable impact. Sometimes the perceivable impact is our resultant impact, or the impact that we are concerned with. Sometimes we have to do a so what analysis. A so what analysis means this is an impact that we think will happen, and you ask yourself the question, so what? And then you think about it, and then you come up with a resultant impact. And if that still makes sense, we continue asking ourselves so what questions until, of course, it goes outside the context of IP. So we would like to track the impact only within the context of IP. So we would like to consider the last resultant impact within an IP context of a particular risk situation. We could use a scale of 1 to 10 for impact scoring, or a high, medium, low, or a 1, 2, 3 as per our convenience. The question is why. The why question I've put over here because I wanted to emphasize that all of these exercises leads to effective governance of IP risks, because without governance, this would be a one-time exercise, and this would remain as a risk register, a typical risk register that one maintains, and is difficult to follow and difficult to maintain. So unless we put this in a continuous IP risk governance cycle, it is very difficult to manage. Okay, risk mitigation strategies, like I said, we have to demarcate between the proactive mitigations consisting of prevention and contingency from reactive mitigation, which means a reactive mitigation means what do we do when a certain risk occurs. Prevention, on the other hand, means what do we do to prevent a certain risk from occurring. And contingency means that in the case a risk occurs, we know what do we have to do, but are we prepared enough for it? To prepare ourselves to take care of reactive mitigation when a risk occurs is what I term as contingency. And the question at the bottom of the box is why this segregation? And the answer to that again is effective governance. Because as I will mention in my later slides, you will see in the governance cycles, we need to monitor and track the proactive mitigations much more frequently and in a different manner than the reactive mitigations. Okay, these are just for illustration. I don't want to spend too much time on this. One of the typical mitigation actions is FTO analysis for every product release. Then the second one being verify associates exposure, and so on. So I'll move on to the next one, which is the most important according to me, the governance methods of monitoring, tracking, learning, and improving. So we set ourselves review parameters of the risk mitigation, of the risk management. We review the situations, impacts, exposures, mitigations, and occurrences. We gather the metrics. We do the recalibration according to all the metrics that we gather. Any occurrences, any history that we can gather and learn from. We implement the learnings into our methods and hence hope to reduce the risk or manage the risks better. So as you will see on the right hand side, the small circle is the proactive one, which, for which we need to do frequent review and monitoring. And we include the reactive one in a larger cycle of a less frequent nature, because from time to time we need to again see if the reactive mitigation is something that which we had thought about some time back is still relevant or not. Okay, these are optional methods of doing the governance. One being scoring by exposure and impact, and coming up with a risk score, and we come up with the risks that are of high score, and we do more frequent reviews of them. Like I said in the earlier slide that we review the risks. We obviously need to pick and choose. If there are certain risks we need to review more frequently or more carefully, then these are ways that we can identify them objectively. On the option 2, we have two separate. The first one was actually a product of impact and exposure, the second one being separately taken. So that we take the first few impacts and the first few exposures and monitor them. Okay, there are a few review items which would be helpful to present a proactive mitigation view, which is what are my sets of actions and what risks do they mitigate. So to the business, they would be clear that they need to take such and such actions, and they need to know what are the risks that that set of action mitigates. And the second one being the effect versus cause view, which is the impact view. What are the potential IP impacts and what situations are they caused by? And hence you can see we have several review items that we use, which are very useful for governance. Okay, last one being IP audit, just so that we know that we are on track. We can do a yearly IP audit to check if all of the plans that we have for IP risk mitigation, governance, assessment, impact analysis are all in place and they are done according to the plan. This can be done once a year or every 6 months according to what we feel is the maturity of our risk management process. Finally, this is a summary, it's a recap of what I just talked about. That's my last slide. Thank you.